Thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. New Mayor Brandon Johnson deals with the harsh reality of summer violence in Chicago.
We can deal with the immediate crisis, which I'm dealing with, but we also can deal with the systemic problems that have been ignored intentionally for over a generation now.
New mayor, same problem of high summer weekend violence. City Council approves $8 million in police misconduct settlements as some older people want a bigger role in the independent search for a new police superintendent.
We ought to be allowing at least the asylum seekers who came here in the latter half of last year to now get work permits. We have jobs available for them.
Governor Pritzker faces some pushback over funding health care for migrants as the city wrestles with where to house the newest arrivals. Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle touts minimal budget gap and no need for tax hikes. But how long will the fiscal good times last? And new questions about ethics at the U.S. Supreme Court amid reports of another justice's lavish free vacations.
A lot to get to, and thank you for watching on this beautiful evening. Maybe you're sitting outside on the porch watching on your device, tipping back a cold beverage or something. Let's get to our panel right now. Joining us are Craig Dellamore of WBBM News Radio, Sam Charles from the Chicago Tribune, Sandra Torres of NBC5 News and Telemundo Chicago, and Dan Mihalopoulos from WBEZ. So as I said, a lot to get to, a lot of violence last weekend, including in suburban Willowbrook. Sandra Torres, 23 shot, 1 dead. A lot of questions surrounding exactly what happened here. What are the questions that you want answered?
Well, it happened in a strip mall, right? And we know that this was a large gathering, and the biggest question was, why didn't police step in to break out? I mean, that's the biggest problem we've seen in Chicago is there's large gatherings. Usually there's a potential that there's going to be violence. So why didn't it get stopped beforehand?
Well, and the police were there. They were just off the site in case there was trouble.
Was this a sanctioned gathering? I mean, it seems unusual that there would be a party at a parking lot in a strip mall in the wee hours of the morning.
It was labeled as a Juneteenth celebration from what I recall. So not unusual for something like that to happen. You were saying that this is something they had done in the past, Sam?
It sounds like it was a recurring annual event, yeah.
Right. And there's threats now of a lawsuit from the gentleman that unfortunately lost his life to his family. Is there some liability here from one of the store owners for perhaps knowingly allowing this to go on?
It's certainly possible. The DuPage County Sheriff's Office really hasn't divulged that much as far as where their investigation stands right now. However, we do know the gentleman who was killed, he was the father of 2 young children, and so unfortunately for he and his family, they have to go on without him. So it certainly seems like a lawsuit would be forthcoming, at least according to the attorney.
Certainly this has rocked the community of Willowbrook, but this is something that Chicago residents have dealt with, obviously, on summer weekends for decades. You heard Mayor Johnson there, Dan Mihalopoulos. How long is that message about the systemic problems going to sort of carry water if the numbers don't go down a little bit?
Yeah, he speaks extremely eloquently about the need to not do the things that have not worked for many years. He speaks eloquently about balancing policing and respecting the constitutional rights of people so that there aren't another $500 billion of settlements, although it added another 8.8 million to that total just this week at City Council. So it's a balancing act. I mean, there are a lot of people that elected him because he was not the police union's candidate. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that can't have we talk about Willowbrook. That's happening all the time in Chicago. It's almost like focusing so much on the submarine that had 5 people in the Atlantic versus,
a
migrant ship that
in the Mediterranean
with hundreds of people. Yeah, it's more rare in Willowbrook, so we are looking at, from a news perspective, at things that are unique or relatively unique, but this is happening in Chicago, and I think he's been a bit lucky that it hasn't been hotter than it has been.
It's hot this weekend, clearly. And then you've got July 4th weekend next weekend, which is always a difficult weekend. Craig Dellamore, interim superintendent of CPD, Fred Waller, saying that cops are burned out, they're working overtime. Is that maybe a subtle message to the mayor who said, let's not hire more cops, that maybe he does need to?
Well, what the mayor said at the same news conference that you used was that, yes, we still do need more people, but as he's been saying for quite a while now, hiring cops is not necessarily a short-term answer because it can take as long as 18 months to get a police officer from in the door and training to out on the street. So what they are doing now is to have parallel things going. Yes, it is different policing out on the streets, but it's also going to be communities, community organizations working with them, and it's going to be the summer jobs, and it's just adding on.
We do have to note the community organizations that work
stepped up.
so hard every weekend in all communities. And without that, I mean, the problem could be a whole lot worse.
Right.
No, just last night, Maggie Hickey, the head of the independent monitoring team that grades the CPD's adherence to the federal consent decree, she had a public meeting in which she noted that the CPD still struggles mightily with community engagement as far as organizing with community groups in a way to help tamp down some of this frequent violence that
So
we
you
often
say there's
see.
still not a whole lot of coordination there.
The way that Hickey characterized it was that it's kind of a scatter shot. There are a lot of different silos of community engagement offices that aren't working in a cohesive way that ultimately just hinders all the efforts overall.
And Sandra, I know you wanted to jump in here.
What I was trying to say is all of us have been covering these news conferences every time that the summer begins, right? That Memorial Day weekend news conference. And what do we hear every single year? We're going to add more patrols. We're going to have more people out visible in the streets to try to deter violence. Has it worked? No. We've clearly seen it get worse over the years. And so last weekend alone, it was 75 people shot. Right? So what can be done? So I remember instinctively last week, interim superintendent saying, okay, well, this is not working. What else do we need to do? We need to focus on large gatherings and figure out where the conflict is and see if we can deter some of those issues and know who the people are who are causing these conflicts. Is that going to work? We don't know, but they need to keep trying.
It's something new. We've heard the phrase like flood the zone so many times at these weekend press conferences. Do you detect a specific strategy here from the interim superintendent, Fred Waller, that's different from his predecessors?
Not particularly. I mean, he was talking about more cops, but again, you know, it can't happen overnight. He's only going to be there for a short while. You know, you mentioned at the top of the program this process to choose 3 finalists, ostensibly independent commission, and that will give those options to the mayor to choose from those 3. It supposedly is going to move along rather expeditiously, but having said that, the interim is not in the mix, has not put himself forward to be the superintendent going forward. So, you know, again, if you had some cohesive strategy, perhaps you could have an interim continuing the practices of a predecessor. But right now, that's not the case. You got a new mayor, you've got an interim, and soon you'll have a permanent superintendent. Not a lot of clear direction.
And we have to talk about that process. It is such a complicated process here to find the 3 finalists for the next superintendent. And now it hit a road bump, Sam Charles. 19 Alder people are complaining that a certain candidate, Brian McDermott, who is the chief of patrol, has not received enough consideration. First of all, who is McDermott and why are all these Alder people rallying behind him?
Brian McDermott has been with the CPD for 28 years. He was previously the commander of the 8th District on the southwest side, and under former Superintendent David Brown, he was promoted to Chief of Patrol. So all the cops you see in uniform and in marked squad cars, they ultimately report to him, which is the lion's share of the entire police department. According to reporting that was made this past week, you know, McDermott was given something of an informal interview, but however, he was not given a second one, and that clearly irked, you know, nearly 24 aldermen who believe that he is more qualified than others who may have applied, and he merited a second interview. However, you know, Anthony Driver, the president of the group that's leading this search, pushed back a little bit and kind of was disappointed in the Alders for going
and
to
just
the
to
media.
clarify, Anthony Driver is the head of the Community Commission on Police Accountability per an ordinance that was passed a couple years ago. It is up to them to start this search and find 3 finalists for the mayor, although this is an interim group doing this because eventually it will be elected members taking these seats.
Well, and it's elected members who will be selected by the people who were just elected to be in the police district commissions.
So everyone at home needs to be kind of drawing out a map here to make sense of this.
It is complicated. It's a web.
Right.
It's a web. But the important thing is that they are in power now. We've said this before on this program. They are building the airplane while they're flying it.
Right.
They've had like the budget to deal with. They've had other appointments to deal with, and the police board they're going to deal with. But they have to do this too, and they are supposed to talk to everyone. So even if Anthony Driver says it's inappropriate for the alderman can speak. Everyone's supposed to be able to speak. The point is that they have to be independent and they have to do things according to their own laws and rules, and they say that's what they want to do, and they're not going to be discouraged.
And it's 53 people who applied, right? So
Right.
that's a large group to look
And
for.
they're winnowing them down.
More than 30 of them have ties to the CPD as well. So it's not as though Brian McDermott is the only candidate with ties to the department. There's scores of others. And, you know, there were the CCPSA, the group headed by Anthony Driver, they organized 7 public meetings between April and May where they would solicit community feedback for attributes they want to see in the next superintendent.
Right.
And there were dozens of speakers lobbying for specific candidates to be considered.
It's almost like
by the
political campaigns here, though. I don't think we've ever seen that for police superintendents.
And this process is all new,
Yeah.
and the alders who were penning this letter, to me, it looks like just another chapter in the same story of politicking for your preferred candidate.
Which Anthony Driver then clapped back and said, this process is supposed to be without politics now. That's the point.
Yeah, he said it's a more of the Chicago way, which, you know, is not what this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a different approach. Maybe you have 19 city council members out of 50 signing it. You have nearly a quorum, right?
Right.
You have nearly a majority. But they're not there to pass an ordinance here. They're just trying to, and you know, like Craig said, anybody can say whatever they want. We can say whatever we want about any candidate. But what really matters here is they're trying to do an independent process to come up with a good candidate. Because let's face it, there have been some superintendents in the past that, regardless of their attributes, some from within the department, some from outside. We had JFed, remember? None of them have
Who was
been able.
JFed?
JFed, you don't remember Jody
Oh,
Weiss?
Jody
He was a
Weiss. They
former.
called him J-Fed because he was a Fed. Okay. I got
Yeah,
it.
they fit him with the hat and the uniform, but he wasn't a cop from CPD. So at the end of the day, there's different approaches that have been tried, and not a lot of them have worked.
Another approach, Craig Dellamore, is the mayor can just circumvent the whole process, pass an ordinance like former mayors Lightfoot and Emanuel did, and say, I got my own person in mind. Thank you for your recommendations, but we're going to go with this person.
I would be extremely surprised if Brandon Johnson did that, because he has been a proponent of this process too, and I think everyone wants to see it through for this first time, because these are new elected officials. The police councils are not. There's never been that before. So this
is the
a
most
chance.
important hire that a mayor can make. This is your top position here. Are you saying that the mayor doesn't want his person, if he has a person, in that spot?
He does have the power to start the process over
Yes.
again.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
like that
Reject all
that
three.
should be mentioned. Like
It's happened before,
yeah,
but the
it's-
optics of that
the optics
for
of it
a
would not be
reform mayor and a new way mayor, I think, would be really bad.
Well, it's a very interesting process.
And how much longer is interim superintendent Waller going to wait, right? He said he's not going to be in this position for a long
might
time.
be a very long interim period.
There's a
Right.
timetable. They have to. I think what is July 15th,
July 14th.
14th,
deadline.
that
It's the
they have to
deadline.
give them that list. So it's going to happen.
This is going to be a fascinating process to watch. Also this week, $8.8 million in police misconduct settlements, I think you mentioned. That's a big chunk of their yearly budget for misconduct. Are they going to run over that budget?
Well, I mean, depends what else
be
is
the
in the
first time.
pipeline and what
Right.
else gets settled, because a lot of times this is coming from recommendations from the city's lawyers that, hey, if we take this to trial or end up before a jury or judge, it could be a lot worse. So that's ostensibly why they're settling, to save themselves even bigger payments than what they're making, or potentially bigger payments. These cases, I read about them, they're the same as so many of cases that we see month after month at the city council and city council finance committee. You know, people that spent years, if not decades, in prison for crimes that they didn't commit because, you know, they were essentially framed or mistakenly, erroneously convicted, wrongfully convicted. People that got shot, you know, by officers in circumstances that are murky at best. And again and again, the city is paying and the taxpayers are paying.
All right, Sandra, I want to move to the issue of the recent migrant arrivals here, which hasn't gotten as much press in the last few weeks, but still very present issue. So now 300 migrants have been moved into a field house in Gage Park on the south side. What's been the reaction down there?
So there was a community meeting earlier this week. Alderman Raymond Lopez was leading that meeting, and he was basically just saying, this is happening. It wasn't more of a let's get your input and see what you think. It was this is happening, it has been approved. And so the majority of people who moved in are men. And when I interviewed Alderman Lopez earlier this week, he said we had a lot of trouble finding shelter for single men. We found shelter for women, for children, but not for men, so they needed to do this. Also, the majority of these men were in police stations. So initially he said, we're hoping this will drive the numbers to zero of the people who are staying at police stations, but then later he told me, well, we're seeing more buses come in.
That was my next question. Are there still folks in police stations then?
Well, I don't know what the current numbers are at police stations, but at that point, he told me there's more people coming. So we don't know what's going to happen to them. But the whole process, this is supposed to be temporary. He said that. It's supposed to be temporary. We're supposed to place them here for a period of time until we figure out what we can do with them.
And as this happens, Governor Pritzker is getting a little pushback from pro-immigrant groups about health care for undocumented persons in Illinois, which he had to save a little money because it cost a lot more than it was originally projected to cost. But what's this pushback about?
The pushback is what you might expect. People saying, even though the state is running short on money, these people are still coming. And to tell them that you're not going to allow them to enroll in health insurance is inhumane. And that's
And there's an age cutoff is the issue here.
That's one of the issues. Yeah.
Right.
Because no new enrollments.
So it's for the 42 and older, right?
Yes.
It's for the 42 and older because 18 and younger, there's already something established 4 years where children 18 and younger can get access to that health care insurance, but it's 42 and older who cannot enroll anymore. I think they're capping it at about 16,500 is what I saw.
And you heard Governor Pritzker, Dan, at the top of the show saying the federal government needs to do something about relaxing work permits because as the law is now, as newer arrivals are awaiting their asylum cases to be heard, they can't seek out work. What's it going to take?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a problem for many years. It's just become more acute with the migrant crisis now at the border and then migrants being shipped from places like Florida and Texas to Democratic states purposely, obviously, like Illinois and New York or Massachusetts. So what you always have is these immigration courts, including one in downtown Chicago, by the way. We've spent a lot of time there in the past. These cases take forever, and those immigration courts are getting more and more backed up. But these are not undocumented immigrants. These are people that came under international law to seek asylum, and there are jobs. Unemployment is at a historic low. So I understand what Pritzker is saying, but I think he has a political problem here. I think let's be honest, the Latino voters in Illinois have been very supportive of the Democratic Party, much like in New York, maybe not so much in some other states like Florida. And this governor is coming up against a situation, much as previous Democratic governors have faced, where there are Latino representatives like Congressman Chuy Garcia and others who are like, hey, we help you all the time at election time, and then you do this to us?
Although I should say that it's not a monolith in Latino groups. I mean, there are some Latino voters that don't want more benefits for undocumented immigrants. It's not like it's 100 to 0.
No, not 100 to 0, but let's look at the clear majority.
And if I may add to what Dan was saying to give you some perspective from some of the migrants I've interviewed or asylum seekers, I interviewed one who has an appointment in 2 years.
Wow.
So she has to wait with her husband and 3-year-old son for 2 years to meet with an immigration court and decide if they're going to get the work permit or not. And she has every reason valid to stay in this country. Her story is incredible. And then I interviewed another family who has a 6-year wait. And so what do you do that whole time if you can't work and you can't get insurance?
And it seems like all it might take is an executive order from the president, basically, which would probably be challenged in court. But to change those work requirements, and I know that some of the Illinois congresspeople have written a letter to the president. Senator Durbin, I think, has asked the president to do something. Why is there no action?
Well, Washington also hasn't sent as much funding as they've asked for from the states either, including Illinois.
I mean, I think everyone is slow walking would be too harsh a way of putting it, but no one wants to be rushing into this, unfortunately, and even as the crisis deepens. So, the question is, why isn't the president doing this? Well, maybe they're calculating what the blowback would be, even within their own party, within their own administration.
Yes, he's gearing up for a re-election in 2024. A couple other city items this week. There's a push in City Council to require all Chicago businesses to pay the minimum wage, regardless if you're a tipped worker or not. That stalled under Mayor Lightfoot. Is it got a better chance now?
Oh, it has a much better chance now. for two reasons. One, the mayor is in favor of it, although he won't flatly say that, but his floor leader, Carlos Ramirez Rosa, is now the budget chair and is one of the spearheads of this. The head of workforce development is also a progressive. The other thing is that this is the head of the Illinois Restaurant Association says he is willing to talk.
Because he
about
has no other choice here. He looks
Right.
at what the politics are of city council.
It's not just the politics, though. There is a staff shortage, a staffing shortage in the restaurant industry. They need more people. They're going to have to pay more anyway.
Thus our talk about the work permits and stuff.
Exactly.
Anybody who goes out to eat anytime knows about the problem that Craig is talking about. And I was stunned to see the gap between the minimum wage for the rest of the world, which is more than $15 an hour now in Chicago, and the minimum wage for those who are tipped workers, which is less than $10 an hour. Still.
It's under
That's a
9.
big gulf.
But you know, it's much more than it is elsewhere in the country, though, because it's somewhere around $250 in other states. So Illinois is actually doing better, but it's still way low.
We might be doing much better in the city of Chicago. Let's talk about some national stories. More scrutiny on the Supreme Court. Latest ProPublica report on Justice Samuel Alito taking a luxury trip to Alaska on the dime of a conservative billionaire. That backed cases before the court. Dan Milopoulos, you've covered a lot of quote-unquote pay-to-play in Chicago. Does this
We've seen a
look similar?
we've seen a lot of conflicts of interest. The Supreme Court seems like who really has oversight over them from an ethics perspective? They're left to their own devices, and talking about saying that getting trips or very expensive travel and accommodations from people who have interests in cases before you is not a conflict of interest or something that they don't have to report. It's been quite a series of stories showing these at least perceived conflicts of interest. And what does Alito go and do? He goes and runs to the Wall Street Journal, who shamefully give him an opportunity to try to rebut this story
before the story
it's
even
published.
came out, right? To try and circumvent it. And Senator Durbin says he wants to do something about it. They're going to mark up a bill in the Senate to try to enact some ethics reforms. What would those reforms be?
I think it's more about transparency, more reporting of these things. They're actually supposedly required to report these things now, and they're not. So,
But there's no
what are the
recourse. There's no
Exactly.
consequence.
Dan's point, like, what's the oversight?
But is this a separation of powers discussion here? If the Senate or if Congress, the executive branch, legislative branch pass a law, does the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, have to abide by it? Or will there be a legal challenge that's brought before the
Sure there
Supreme
will.
Court?
Exactly. You bet there will be a legal challenge. If the court is involved, they're going to make sure.
But
that
then
it is
don't
the
they have to just
separation of
recuse
powers
all of
argument.
themselves?
I mean, there was 10 cases of this
Right.
GOP, 10 cases that went in front of the Supreme Court,
Right.
in front of Judge Alito, and nothing was done about it.
You're
and
saying
he did
from
not
that-
disclose from that specific GOP donor.
Singer, I believe his name
Yes,
is.
Paul Singer.
Right.
Balance of power between the branches is important, but at the end of the day, kings are not above the law, presidents are not above the law, elected representatives, and legislatures are not above the law. And why are Supreme Court justices allowed to do whatever they want with impunity?
Spoken like a true journalist, and great work from the ProPublica reporters on all of this. Let's get back to a local focus here. Sam Charles, are you looking forward to the NASCAR race next week?
I mean, it's certainly going to complicate traffic.
Already has.
Like that much we know. But it's the hope is that it will expose, I guess, the city to a different audience of people who may be fans of NASCAR that might not otherwise be interested in Chicago, because nationally the city's reputation is one of violence and political gamesmanship and things like that, things that might be unfamiliar to hardcore NASCAR fans.
But NASCAR wants to broaden its audience too, to
yeah.
a more urbane, sophisticated viewership.
I mean, the skyline always looks nice on a TV screen.
But
And
are these drivers ready for these narrow streets and hard right turns?
I was reading that they may not even have a chance to try it because
They'll
they're
have like an
running
hour.
late.
They'll have oh, are they really?
They're running late in building the actual course, and so they may not actually go through it. They may see a virtual.
They are. They're doing virtual simulations.
Right.
But I was told at their big PR rollout that they're going to literally have like an hour or two on the day of to actually run the course.
Call me a
What could go wrong?
Call me a northern elitist, but I don't know too much about NASCAR. I'm with Sandra here. I prefer football, soccer. Everyone knows that. I'm looking forward to Messi coming to Chicago,
Yes.
probably in October.
Right.
World Cup champion. But I guess, a lot of people love NASCAR too, and not just in other parts of the country where
This
it
is an
originated.
experiment. This is going to show them whether they can do this. And so we're going to watch. We're going to watch. The test kitchen is going to be cooking right in our
America's
midst.
Test Kitchen, a reference to a really good PBS program. Tying it all up. We
You're
are out of
welcome.
time. Thank you, Craig Delamore. We are out of time, so our thanks to Sam Charles, Craig Delamore, Dan Mihalopoulos, and Sandra Torres. Thank you all so much. And that is our show for this Friday night. For the Weekend Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe. See you at 10 for Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. Also this week, there's a concert in Reese Park on the far northwest side that basically just got approved by the Park District, even though all the tickets were sold and the bands were booked.
What show is that?
This is Reset, the Reset Festival.
It's indie alternative sort of like LCD sound system, I think, is one of the bands playing.
My question, LCD sounds. When is there going to be a comprehensive sort of plan from City Council and the Mayor to deal with these festivals and then balance the interests of the folks in the neighborhoods that don't want them in their parks?
There's a lot of reporting to show that people weren't listening to the community around Douglas Park.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.